Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Long-haul truckers. What's the creepiest / most paranormal thing you've seen on the road at night? Episode 1. Years ago, in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, Central Texas, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, around 4 or 5. I had just come off a string of days at home, so I know I wasn't tired. I am on one of those two-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of nowhere, when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first I just thought it was roadkill, as is usually the case. As I get closer, I see that it is roadkill and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy taking the antlers as a trophy, or he's sick. As I got closer still, I can now see that's this guy eating the deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing them up to his face. At this point he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at my truck, but at me. It stands up, and that's when I see that it's huge, brown, and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh no. This thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed and I'm about to the point in the road he's standing at. I didn't even think of stopping, in fact I'm starting to lay on it and get the hell out of there. As I'm passing it, it's looking at me, again not at the truck. It is looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously has the intelligence to know that there's a driver in here and knows where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nose Pete. Old truck design where the hood goes straight out from the windshield, known for being tall and difficult to see around. This thing is giant. I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in its eyes. It scares me. I was in the VA/MD area and had a lot of work-related sites ranging from downtown Baltimore to Virginia Beach and all around. Friday wrapped up, and I hit the road to some social arrangements I had made for the weekend. Spent the weekend with friends out in various parts of VA, got dragged off to other places even further out, the usual weekend fun times. It's late Sunday night when I have to leave, or I'm not going to be able to get home in time to start my, thankfully late afternoon, Monday. I'm fully rested, I didn't do any drinking, I'm not into drugs. On the highway at about 3 a.m., in the middle of nowhere between Roanoke and DC, absolutely nobody around. I'm cruising along in the left lane simply because nobody else is around. No headlights for the past hour, no tail lights either. No road lamps either. It's dark, it's mildly damp, it's foggy. I have the music up, I'm feeling good, all is fine. And then I just happen to look to the left and there is a dog barking at me. A German Shepherd, in a car passenger seat, somewhat blue glow from the instruments inside the car, and it's got its face to its window and it's barking its head off at me. I get a good hard look at it, too, because at first my brain is not registering, cop car, dummy. I'm doing 90 plus in a 75, I promptly have the oh shit moment when the dog, the instruments, the white crown vice/light bar all click in my brain after a second hard look. I put my foot on the brakes and start slowing down hard but safe, to pull over. I even put my blinker on to start shifting lanes over to the right to pull over because... Wait. There is no shoulder on the left side of this road. I look back to my left, where there is still no shoulder/room for another car, and it's just gone. No trace. I slammed my brakes and stopped in the middle of the highway, flipped on all my light bars, and even looked around with my handheld spot. There was nothing. No taillights, no headlights, no engine sounds, nothing. There are no other tire marks in the damp but mine, and I can see for a nice long distance both ways, too. Nothing. My vehicle had great visibility, and a lot of extra lighting, off-road SUV with the trimmings, there is no viable way somebody pulled a sneaky, let alone drove that fast on wet sloped grass and rocks on my left side. So. Yep, there you have it. Ghost police officer and his dog didn't like me speeding, apparently. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift to where he was driving 24, 36 hours, or more without a break longer than a quick bathroom or fast food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd repeatedly ask me things like how long it would take us to get from home to the store if we were going 30 miles per hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road, etc. He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage markers, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation, etc. One night after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up thing didn't seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely, so he started doing those logic games aloud to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going 55 miles per hour? Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod-jerk thing which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random-ass mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was a matter of seconds between that reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road going 60 plus mph, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up saying, I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that's something that feels pretty close to spiritual. This is my father's story, and he wasn't a long-haul trucker but rather an 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 70s, and without a certain long-haul trucker I probably wouldn't be here. The gas station was 24 hours, and my dad was the only one working the night shift, 11 to 7 I think. A guy comes in and just gives him the creeps. Seems unsure. He was wearing tight jacket/pants, and you could tell he had something in his pants under the jacket. It was during the summer and was warm, so why is he wearing a jacket to begin with? It was later confirmed he was on drugs. A lot of truck drivers used this station as it was the only one open 24 hours for a long stretch of the highway. They also had a big lot where they let truckers park and sleep or take a break. On this night at this time, it was just my dad, unsure man, and one trucker in there he kind of knew, as in, came in frequent enough to be conversational, and asked if he'd stay in the station and hang out until unsure man left. Well, after looking at the stocked shelves for several minutes while sneaking peeks at my dad behind the counter, the unsure guy eventually looked fed up and got into his blue car and sped off. Cool trucker guy hung out with my dad a little longer until another couple of guys came in to use the booths. They had to eat a sandwich. I should also point out this was pretty middle of nowhere rural southeast United States and the 1970s. CB and landline was it. My dad only had a landline in the store. Dad did not have any protection or weapon of any kind. So, the hours pass, and my dad had shaken off the paranoia when all of a sudden this truck driver guy in a car comes hauling ass into the lot, jumps out, and sprints into the store hollering he needs a phone. He didn't have a CB, nor did he see a phone at the other station. He also wasn't familiar with the area, and my dad's station was the first place he found. Calls 911 to report that he had walked in on a gas station 40 miles back, next closest station, to find the attendant shot and dead. No one else around. And the only other piece of information is that a blue car was speeding out of the lot when the trucker pulled in. Apparently they eventually apprehend the guy in the blue car. My dad confirms it was unsure man from earlier in the night, and they charge him with murder and armed robbery. To the long-haul trucker who waited around with my dad that night, thanks and hope you're keeping it real. Also worth adding that apparently unsure guy in blue car was already a bad apple who was either being looked for or on probation or something. He was in the system. My dad has told me this story a couple times and each time it always kind of weirds me out. He is not a trucker, but when he was in the military one night him and a friend went out to get food. About halfway into their drive down a dark road my dad and his friend noticed a woman in a red dress with black hair walking. My dad and his friend found it odd because it didn't seem safe, and it wasn't that warm. My dad said deep down he knew stopping was a bad idea and so they drove by a little more slowly to get a glimpse to see if she needed help. As they drove by my dad and his friend both swear she has no face. Instead, there was just a black hole as if she had been in a wreck and her face was taken off. It freaked them both out so badly my dad floored it and when they stopped to eat both of them agreed they saw the same thing. Come to find out a woman had been killed earlier that year in an accident. They were talking about it when a stranger told them the sightings of the woman were actually common. I am not one to believe in the paranormal, but the story is still kind of weird. Edit. Guys, I will reiterate that I never said I believed in the paranormal. I never said, this story is true and there is no scientific explanation. I just told a story and whether you find some value in it or not is ultimately dependent upon who you are and what you value. Regardless of how cliché or silly something like this might sound, I always like to state the fact that we are all human. When we see or hear something we don't understand, our minds get to us and it makes us more paranoid or begs us to continue questioning what we experienced. That is something humans just do. If you are out in the woods and you hear a noise and you are alone and it's dark, you instinctively question your safety and become paranoid. We want answers and we want to know we are okay. I don't need scientific explanation because I am aware that the brain does things we don't understand. But what we do understand is that when can't find an explanation it drives us nuts and scares us. The black my dad saw was probably just bad or poor lighting, or the heat of the moment and the brain didn't get the lady's features. Perhaps the woman had hair in front her eyes. There are all sorts of explanations that make way more sense, but when faced with the same circumstance we would probably all react the same way and question our sanity. I'm a trucker. Got a good pic of a cadaver on the side of the road. I interact with motorists every day when I'm out trucking, whether it's sort of in traffic, or just in general in the truck stop as people standing in line for their food and coffee, going to the bathroom. I'm aware I'm like king of the road in my massive truck, but when people's cars go past, I like to think of those cars being occupied by loved ones. So, they're still somebody's loved ones and it's part of my duty of operating the heaviest vehicles that they make it home safe just as much as it is my duty that I also make it home safe. But thinking when I woke up, me and that person, both alive, got plans ahead of us, things we want to do today, tomorrow, this summer, and by midday she's rendered into non-existence, her body an inanimate object. Weird way to think about it. I have a morbid curiosity. I saw 2 sheeted dead bodies on last tour of duty. We knew the accident I'm talking about was fatal when we saw the coroner's van go by, following the forensics truck. Both me and my co-driver immediately said, this accident is definitely fatal. Be careful out there. Unless your hobby in life is shooting up fentanyl-laced heroin, I'd argue that driving is probably the most dangerous thing you do on a daily basis, where out of nowhere you can just randomly die. For that matter, the accident, my co-driver said it was an SUV that rolled over, the driver's compartment compacted and inflicted a fatal injury on the driver, if I had to guess, probably blunt force trauma to the head area. In the 1990s I spent a lot of time hitchhiking around Europe. I'm a Brit. One trip, I was hitching from Newcastle, my hometown, to the south of France. I'd got to a point just south of Paris, some little entrance ramp in the Arise end of nowhere. It was around 2 a.m., and I was flat out exhausted. I'd placed my sign by my feet and was sitting on my pack, sleeping in place. I was woken by the unmistakable blast of a lorry horn, jumped up and ran, without thinking, to the lorry that had pulled up just yards away. The driver asked where I was headed. I replied, south, and he laughed and told me to get in. After a fairly brief conversation about my trip up until that point, where I was going, etc., the guy realized I was literally dead on my feet, exhausted. He pointed to the bed behind the cab seats and said if I wanted to get my head down, I was welcome to crash out. One of the greatest unwritten rules of hitching at the time was that the trucker's sleep area was sacrosanct. You didn't even put your bag there. So, this guy, Eve, his name has just come to me, offering to let me rest up was out of the ordinary. I did a quick, split-second, evaluation of, am I going to be horribly tortured or is this guy legit, and decide I was safe. This was, in hindsight, probably based much more on my state of exhaustion than any true evaluation of his trustworthiness, but hey-ho. I jumped in the back, lay out flat for the first time in 2 days, and was asleep within seconds. 5 hours later I woke up in an empty cab, parked in truck stop as the sun was beginning to rise. Eve returned within a minute or so, espresso in hand, and started helping me to get my bags out his cab. I should point out that my spoken French at the time was basic at best, and Eve spoke no English. Most of our communication was a combination of hand signals, confusion, and laughter. We went into the truck stop cafe, or relays, for anyone who's traveled in France, basic, but a cut above your usual truck stop as far as food and drinks are concerned, and Eve insisted on paying for a monster breakfast for me, whilst he only had another coffee and a croissant. As I was working my way through the breakfast, Eve was up at the counter, chatting to the proprietor. He clearly knew them, so I didn't think anything of it. Obviously he was chatting to his friend rather than doing monkey signs to the monolingual Brit, or so I thought. After a while, he came over and said he had to go. I knew this was my stopping point as far as he was concerned. He was heading west whereas I was continuing south, at which point I thanked him profusely for all of his help, the breakfast, and wished him a safe journey. He wished me luck and went on his way. After I'd finished my breakfast, I went up to the counter to order another coffee before I set out on the rest of my journey. At this point I was about halfway down France, and when I handed over my money, the proprietor waved it away, saying it was on Eve. Yes, he'd paid for my next coffee before he left, on top of buying me breakfast. I gave him a little salute, thinking, top bloke, and sat down to drink my coffee whilst having a little chuckle. Ananya, soon enough I figured I'd best get back on the road, so I went back to the counter to order a jambon beurre to take away for the road and say goodbye to the proprietor, who had also been super nice to me throughout. Again, I went to pay, and it was waved away. Eve had not only bought my breakfast, paid for a coffee he'd figured I'd have after I left, he'd also told the proprietor to give me a sandwich before I left, and paid for it. As this was all being explained to me, I just couldn't help breaking out in the biggest smile and laughing like hell. What a bloke. I thanked the proprietor, asked him to sincerely thank Eve the next time he saw him, and went to hit the road. At which point, I was then told to sit down and wait for about another half hour, as Eve had arranged a lift south for me with a colleague he knew was passing by. The man was an absolute gent, went beyond the helping your fellow man, and did it all without even sticking around for me to say thanks. This isn't my story but an old friend of mine's. In the 90s John was an IT guy in parts of eastern Iowa and far west Illinois. He was used to driving from one account to another either late at night or early in the morning. He'd pick a halfway point to use a rest stop and to grab one of those awful paper cup coffees from the machines while he was there. One early morning about 4:30 a.m. he was in Iowa, and he stopped at a wide spot in the road rest stop. He parked and there weren't any other people there except for a couple of semis who looked like they had been there for quite a while. He went into the men's room, and it was deserted. He used the bathroom and went to the sink to wash his hands. He said he caught some movement from the corner of his eye and there was a very tall, very thin man standing right in the middle of the entrance about 15 feet away. He was dressed all in black and he says that the guy's eyes were pitch black. The man was giggling to himself, and John swore he was at least 8 feet tall. He glanced down to grab a paper towel from the machine and when he looks up this man is so close he can hear him breathing with a loud bubbly sound. There's no way he could have crossed 15 feet in 1 second. As he told it, this thing, slowly smiled at him, and it wasn't a smile. It was a bearing of serrated, sharp teeth and this thing starts chuckling like he's looking at a 3-piece KFC meal. My friend screamed "Jesus help me!" and runs for his car. My friend says the thing is startled, like he wasn't supposed to be able to move. He felt like he should have been frozen like staring at a snake. He runs to his car, which wasn't locked, slams the locks down, starts the car and floors it is getting out of there. As he's leaving he looks in the rear view and this thing is running after the car. He always swore somehow this thing followed him home. He was paralyzed in an accident not long after and I went to care for him for a little while. I brought my 4-year-old son with me and in his typical baby way, he would chatter away while the two of us were talking. I asked him one day who he was talking to. My son said he says his name is Biter. He has long teeth, and he lives with Mr. John. I grabbed my son and ran out of there. I never went. Driving my flatbed from St. Helena, California, to Wiley, Texas. This happened somewhere near the Tahoma border. I picked up a hitchhiker. He was standing by the side of the road with a trembling thumb out. Trembling from the cold maybe? Soon I would learn that this was the trembling of fear. The trembling of a man, who looked as though he has seen a ghost. Where to? I asked. Please, I know this is weird. Just take me to a bar, for I need a drink. I will buy you a drink or a hot sandwich. I thought this was odd. I have picked up many hitchhikers in my day, and such a request was never asked. As I was about to say, "Get lost buddy, whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." But I looked into the man's eyes, and I saw terror. Something compelled me to open my passenger door for this man. He entered. At the bar, the hitchhiker began his tale. Earlier on this night of torrential rain, the hitchhiker was seeking a ride. Next to the road he sat with his thumb out. For hours he waited in the rain. A few cars passed, but none slowed. Frustrated, the hitchhiker was about to rest his thumb and find shelter for the night. And then he saw headlights. Headlights of a terribly slow approaching car. The hitchhiker eagerly approached the car waiting for it to stop. Oddly, the slow-moving car continued drifting forward. Maybe the pace was slowing, or maybe this car was always moving at such a slow speed. But this car never came to a complete stop. The headlights pierced the rain, as the hitchhiker stood confused. Will this car stop? Perhaps I should get in. I have never seen a car drive so slowly like this. The hitchhiker decided to just jump in this car. He stumbled to the rain as he pulled the passenger door and had a seat. To his horror, there was no one in the driver's seat. There was no one in the back seat. The car was bare. But it kept moving forward. The headlights still on, but now in front of him as he looked out of the windshield, as the car continued to creep forward. The hitchhiker quickly exited this ghost car, ran for miles. He rested. He ran some more. Rested, ran some more. Finally, after catching his breath, he stuck out his thumb and stood by a road. The hitchhiker then saw headlights. But this time the car was driving at a reasonable pace. It wasn't a car at all, it was a flatbed truck. That is where the hitchhiker and I met. The bartender brings the hitchhiker and me our beer. And then, two men, drenched in rain, came running into the bar. They pointed at the hitchhiker. "Hey, there's the idiot that tried jumping into our car as we were pushing it through the rain." I was out on the West Coast, trying to make $1 and things didn't work out. I was down on my luck, got tired roaming and bumping around, so I started thumbing back east, toward my hometown. Made a lot of miles, the first 2 days, and I figured I'd be home in a week, if my luck held out this way, but the third night I got stranded, way out of town at a cold, lonely crossroads. Rain was pouring down. I was hungry and freezing, done caught a chill when the lights of a big semi topped the hill. Lord, I sure was glad to hear them air brakes come on, and I climbed in that cab, where I knew it'd be warm. At the wheel sit a big man, he weighed about 210. He stuck out his hand and said with a grin, "Big Joe's the name." I told him mine, and he said, "The name of my rig is Phantom 309. I asked him why he called his rig such a name. He said, "Son, this old Mac can put them all to shame. There am not a driver, or a rig, running any line aren't seen nothing but taillights from Phantom 309. Well, we rode and talked the better part of the night. When the lights of a truck stop came in sight, he said, "I'm sorry son, this is as far as you go, 'cause I got to make a turn, just on up the road." Well, he tossed me a dime as he pulled her in low and said, "Have yourself a cup on old Big Joe." When Joe and his rig roared out in the night in nothing flat, he was clean out of sight. Well, I went inside and ordered me a cup, told the waiter Big Joe was setting me up. You could have heard a pin drop. It got deathly quiet, and the waiter's face turned kind of white. "Well, did I say something wrong?" I said with a halfway grin. He said, "Nah, this happens every now and then. Every driver in here knows Big Joe, but son, let me tell you what happened about 10 years ago. At the crossroads tonight, where you flagged him down, there was a bus load of kids, coming from town, and they were right in the middle. When Big Joe topped the hill, it could have been slaughter, but he turned his wheel. Well, Joe lost control, went into a skid and gave his life to save that bunch of kids, and there at that crossroads, was the end of the line for Big Joe and Phantom 309. But, every now and then, some hiker will come by and like you, Big Joe, give them a ride here, have another cup and forget about the dime, keep it as a souvenir, from Big Joe and Phantom 309. I'm not a long-haul trucker by trade, but back in the day I had several odd jobs that required I drive across the country. One was shipping horses. I drove the truck from barns to shows or vice versa, and the other was working as road crew for a rock band. I was incredibly young. 16 to 20 years old. For reference, I'm female, short, athletic. Deaf the odd 1 hour at a lot of rest stops and gas stations along the major routes. I also was tattooed and had a red mohawk, which made me stand out more. Several weird things happened that I remember. But first I want to say, Navajo Nation is indeed really creepy. Always drove through at night too, never meant to plan that way, but that's always how it happened. Another creepy place is northern Utah. Totally hills have eyes up there. Anyways, here's story 1. I was driving from Galveston, Texas to New Orleans, Louisiana. Galveston had just been hit by the hurricane, and there was a weird serial killer moving through that city, so the vibe had already begun as weird. Just as I crossed the border from TX to LA, I started to get super tired. Was really late, 3 a.m.-ish. Tried to find a gas station to pull over, rest, and fill up, but all of them were closed. Gave up, pulled into the next one which was closed, parked in the far corner of the lot, killed my car, a convertible Jeep at the time, and laid my seat back to sleep. Everything seemed quiet. There were a few lights from the station that were on 24/7, but I parked far enough away they couldn't really bother my eyes. I woke up with a start. Had been dreaming, but I had this like gut instinct to wake up. I immediately saw someone covered in mud, wearing rags, holding a knife, advancing slowly towards my car. He was maybe 5 feet away, moving forward. My adrenaline kicked in immediately and I switched the car on. At that point he lets out some guttural growl and launches towards the car, as I'm backing up. I barely miss him as he's grabbing at the vehicle. With the headlights on, I could see he was covered in sores and the knife was all rusty. I sped out of there, didn't sleep again all the way to NOLA. Freaked me out so badly. I also never again slept in my car. The idea he could have been watching me sleep for who knows how long freaked me out. My car was also a convertible, he could have easily cut his way in. That image of waking up to some crazy person advancing on me with a knife has also given me nightmares for many years. Second story, I was hauling horses from Kansas to Tucson, Arizona. Driving a big Ford truck, a dually, with a small trailer carrying 3 horses. Near Gallup, around 2 a.m., the back inner tire on the passenger side blows out. I pulled off the road and assessed the situation. There was zero chance I could change the tire myself given the trailer/dually truck situation. And I'm tired and weak from exhaustion. So, I call a tow company and try to find a temporary boarding place for the horses. It's the morning of Easter Sunday. Literally no one is open. I'm going through the yellow pages calling tow company after tow company. Yes, I'm old, this is pre-smartphones. Finally, I find a Native American tow company who also has a ranch with boarding for the horses and a truck to come grab the trailer. Was a godsend. But the guy and his wife, who ran the company, told me to be incredibly careful not to leave my truck during the 2-hour drive it would take for them to arrive. They said this in such an emphatic way I began to get really scared. They told me not to open the door for anyone and to keep the doors locked. No one was really on the road, so I was confused as to who could really be a threat out there. But I took them seriously and locked my doors and waited. I kept hearing this weird scratching sound on the back panel window of the truck. Like someone was trying to open the small window back there. A couple times the truck would sway, which I figured was the horses. It was pitch black out. No wind. I heard a few footsteps but chalked it up to the wind or my imagination. Was getting scared out there alone, unable to move. Eventually the nice couple with the tow truck and other truck to haul the ponies show up. They immediately and first move me from my cabin to the cabin of their tow truck. Tell me not to move or open the door under any circumstances. The couple is super fast, lady deals with the horses, man gets my truck up on the tow bed. They then drive me to their ranch, after the man drops my truck off at a local shop owned by his cousin who he says will handle the flat on Monday. Anyways, long story short, this wonderful couple takes care of me and the horses, gets my truck tire fixed. As I'm ready to leave on Monday afternoon, there's a story on the local news of a woman with a flat tire who was murdered alongside the same stretch of highway on Sunday evening. She'd been out changing a tire and looks like someone murdered her. I asked the couple, and they didn't say much other than to never ever get out of the car at night along this highway, ever. Said it was certain death. They also gave me some bags of potpourri stuff to have /burn in my truck cabin, for protection. I felt incredibly lucky to find these nice PPLTPH. They looked out for me and never once did I feel unsafe staying at their house. I was 18 at the time and knew nothing about safety along trucking routes. But from now on I drive through that area, and I don't stop if I can avoid it. Load up on gas, check tires in Flagstaff and ride on through to Albuquerque. There's weird stuff out there on the reservations and I don't pretend to know, or want to know, what it is.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.